The heavy mahogany door of my father's study slammed shut with a sound that felt like a guillotine dropping on my inheritance. I stood there, clutching Elias's calloused hand, while my brother Sterling laughed, a sharp, jagged sound that cut through the prestige of the Vance estate. My father, Alistair Vance, didn't even look at me. He simply pointed at the exit and said, "You chose the mop over the crown, Talia. Now, get out of my sight before I have the security treat you like the vagrant you've decided to become." That was the moment my world shattered, but let me back up a little. That morning, I had been at the downtown offices of the City Chronicle, finishing an editorial on urban redevelopment. I was exhausted, but it was the good kind of tired, the kind that comes from doing work that actually matters. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was a message from my mother, Beatrice. "Dinner at 7 o'clock sharp. Your father has an announcement regarding the merger, and he expects you to bring that friend of yours. It's time we settle this." I stared at the word friend and felt a familiar sting. I had been married to Elias Thorne for 6 months, but to my family, he didn't even have a name. He was just a shadow, a smudge on the polished glass of the Vance reputation. When I met Elias, I wasn't looking for a rebel romance. I was a journalist looking for a lead on a story about the unseen workers who kept the city running. I found him in the basement of the Meridian Plaza, cleaning a spill with a methodical, quiet dignity that stopped me in my tracks. He didn't look like a man defeated by his work. He looked like a man who owned the silence around him. We talked for an hour that night, and then every night after. He was brilliant, kind, and possessed a dry wit that made the superficial world of high society galas feel like a bad fever dream. When we got married at City Hall, I knew I was trading my trust fund for a life of budget spreadsheets and small apartments, and I didn't care. "You ready for this?" Elias asked as we pulled up to the Vance gates in his beat-up 2012 sedan. He was wearing his only suit, a charcoal gray one that was slightly tight in the shoulders but clean and pressed. "I'm ready as long as you're with me," I whispered, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. The Vance estate was a monument to old money, rolling lawns, Grecian statues, and a driveway long enough to host a marathon. As we walked through the front door, the head butler, Silas, took Elias's coat with a look of visible disdain, holding it between 2 fingers as if it were contaminated. The dining room was already full. Alistair sat at the head of the table, flanked by Beatrice and Sterling. The air was thick with the scent of expensive wine and cold judgment. "Sit," Alistair commanded without looking up from his plate. The dinner was a slow-motion car crash. Sterling spent 20 minutes bragging about the new skyscraper Vance Global was trying to acquire, the Zenith Tower, while Beatrice made pointed comments about the struggles of the working class and how difficult it must be to find decent soap when one works in sanitation. Elias took it all with a calm that bordered on supernatural. He didn't argue. He didn't flinch. He just ate his steak and listened. Finally, Alistair wiped his mouth and leaned back. "Talia, enough of this charade. The merger with the Sterling Cross Group requires a unified front. You are a Vance. Your husband is a janitor. It's an embarrassment that has reached the ears of my board members. I've had my lawyers draw up the annulment papers. Sign them, and you'll receive your full trust fund, plus a seat on the executive board. Refuse, and you are no longer a daughter of this house." I felt the blood rush to my face. "You're asking me to trade my husband for a skyscraper?" "I'm asking you to trade a mistake for a future," Alistair countered, his voice like ice. "Look at him, Talia. He cleans floors. He empties trash. He is a man of no consequence. Do you really think he belongs at this table?" I stood up, my chair screeching against the marble floor. "He's worth 10 of you, Dad. He works for everything he has. He doesn't spend his life trying to crush people just to see his name on a building." Sterling sneered, leaning over the table. "He doesn't have a name on a building, Talia. He probably can't even spell equity. He's a bottom feeder who trapped you because he saw a golden ticket." Elias stood up then. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't look angry. "Mr. Vance, I didn't marry your daughter for your money. In fact, I'd prefer if you kept every cent of it. It seems to be the only thing keeping you upright. That was the end. Alistair's face turned a shade of purple I'd never seen before. He ordered us into his study, where the final ultimatum was delivered. He didn't just disown me, he wiped me from the family records. You leave with the clothes on your back, he hissed. No car, no credit cards, no Vance name. Let's see how long your love lasts when you're scrubbing floors beside him. We walked out into the night, the heavy gates closing behind us with a final, metallic thud. I was shaking, tears finally blurring my vision. Elias pulled me into a hug, his jacket smelling of cheap laundry detergent and something else, something expensive and masculine that I couldn't quite place. I'm so sorry, Talia, he whispered into my hair. I never wanted to cost you your family. They weren't a family, Elias, I sobbed. They were a corporation. The next few months were a blur of reality checks. I lost my car, my premium health insurance, and my social circle. My friends from the debutante days stopped answering my texts the moment the news broke that I had been cut off. We moved into a one-bedroom apartment in a part of the city where the streetlights hummed and the sirens never stopped. I kept my job at the paper, but without the Vance influence, my editors started giving me the grunt work, obituaries and police blotters. Elias worked double shifts. He'd leave at 6 p.m. and wouldn't return until dawn, his hands often cracked and red from the industrial cleaners. Yet, every morning, he'd have a hot cup of coffee waiting for me and a small bouquet of wildflowers he'd found on his way home. He was my rock, but I could see the toll it was taking. Or so I thought. One night, about 4 months after the disowning, I woke up at 3 a.m. to the sound of Elias's phone buzzing on the nightstand. He was in the bathroom, the shower running. I glanced at the screen. It was an encrypted message. The board is requesting a meeting regarding the Zenith Tower acquisition. They are pushing back on the 40% margin. We need your signature to finalize the block. I frowned, the journalist in me instantly alert. The Zenith Tower? That was the building my father was desperate to buy. Why would someone be messaging a janitor about a corporate merger? Before I could think, another message popped up. Vance Global is overleveraged. If we pull the lease agreements now, we can acquire their holding company by Friday. Your call, Mr. Thorne. My heart stopped. Mr. Thorne? I put the phone back exactly as I found it just as the shower stopped. Elias walked out, drying his hair with a towel, looking like the same humble man I married. But for the first time, I looked at his hands, the way he carried himself, the quiet intensity in his eyes. I realized that while I had been mourning the loss of my father's empire, I might have been sleeping next to a much larger one. The next morning, I decided to do what I do best, investigate. I waited for Elias to leave for his shift, then I followed him. But he didn't head toward the maintenance entrance of the city hall. He drove his old sedan to a private parking garage 3 blocks away. I watched from a distance as he got out, opened his trunk, and did something that made my jaw drop. He took off his work shirt and pulled on a bespoke, navy blue Italian suit. He swapped his work boots for polished Oxfords that cost more than our apartment's rent. A black SUV with tinted windows pulled up, and a man I recognized as one of the city's top legal consultants stepped out and bowed slightly. Good morning, sir, the consultant said. The documents for the Vance acquisition are ready for your review. Elias nodded, his expression cold and commanding, the look of a man who didn't just clean buildings, but owned the ground they were built on. He stepped into the SUV and disappeared into the morning traffic. I stood on the sidewalk, my mind racing. My husband, the man my father called a bottom feeder, was currently orchestrating the downfall of the Vance family empire. I spent the day at the library, digging through shell companies and offshore trusts. I found a name that appeared everywhere in the city's real estate records, the Thorne Group. It was a ghost company, a multi-billion-dollar entity that owned nearly 50% of the commercial real estate in the downtown district, and the sole owner was a man named Elias Thorne, a man who had successfully remained anonymous by posing as the very people who cleaned his hallways. I went home and waited. When Elias walked through the door at his usual time, smelling of floor wax again, which I now realized was a clever ruse. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of printouts. "Long day at the office?" I asked, my voice trembling with a mix of betrayal and awe. Elias froze. He looked at the papers on the table, then at me. The janitor facade dropped instantly. He didn't look tired anymore. He looked like a king who had been caught wearing rags. He sat down across from me, sighing heavily. "I was going to tell you, Talia. I was waiting for the right moment." "The right moment?" I whispered. "Elias, my father is about to lose everything. He's been trying to buy the Zenith Tower for 3 years, and you own it. You've owned it this whole time." "I don't just own the tower, Talia," Elias said, his voice deep and steady. "I own the debt your father used to build his company. And I'm about to call it in." I stared at him, the weight of the revelation sinking in. My family had disowned me for marrying a man they thought was nothing, while that very man held their entire lives in the palm of his hand. But as I looked into Elias's eyes, I saw a flicker of something dark, a plan that went far beyond mere business. "Why the janitor act, Elias?" I asked. "Why me?" "Because," he said, reaching across the table to take my hand, "I needed to know if there was anyone in this city who could love a man for who he is, not for what he owns. And you, Talia, are the only one who passed the test. But now, your father is making a move that I cannot ignore. He's trying to sell your mother's ancestral lands to a fracking company just to save his own skin." Elias stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline. "Tomorrow morning, Vance Global holds their emergency board meeting. They think they're meeting with a representative of the Thorn Group to sign the rescue papers." He turned back to me, a predatory glint in his eyes. "I want you to be there, Talia. I want you to see the look on their faces when they realize who they actually kicked out of their house." I felt a surge of adrenaline. This wasn't just about a marriage or a secret, this was about a reckoning that had been decades in the making. My father, my mother, Sterling, they were all about to walk into a trap set by the very man they had spat upon. "What are you going to do to them?" I asked. Elias leaned down, whispering in my ear. "I'm going to give them exactly what they said I was worth. Nothing." As the sun began to set, I realized that the quiet life I thought I had built was about to explode into a corporate war that would shake the foundations of the city. I looked at the man I married, the janitor, the billionaire, the shadow, and I knew that by tomorrow morning, the Vance name would mean nothing, and the world would finally know the name Elias Thorn. But as we prepared for the meeting, a sudden realization hit me. If Elias was this powerful, what else was he hiding? Just as I was about to ask, his phone rang again, and the name on the screen sent a chill down my spine. The name flashing on the screen was Alistair Vance. My father. The man who had stood in his mahogany-paneled study and told me I was dead to him the moment I signed that marriage certificate with a nobody. Elias didn't pick up. He didn't even silence the ringer. He simply watched the phone vibrate against the marble countertop until it went silent, the rejection hanging in the air like a physical weight. "He's called 6 times today," Elias said, his voice devoid of the warmth he usually reserved for me. "He thinks he's calling a ghost. A corporate entity. He has no idea he's calling the man who used to mop his floors." "Elias, how long?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "How long have you been planning this? Was our entire marriage just a move on a chessboard?" He walked toward me, the shadows of the kitchen making him look taller, more imposing. Gone was the slouch of a man who spent 10 hours a day on his feet. He stood with the posture of a predator. He took my face in his hands, and for a second, I saw the Elias I knew, the man who brought me flowers for no reason and listened to my rants about investigative dead ends. "Talia, I married you because you were the only person in this city who looked at me and saw a human being," he said softly. "But I've been planning the downfall of Vance Global since I was 12 years old. Since the day your father framed my father for embezzlement and watched him rot in a cell while he built his empire on the ruins of my family's name." I gasped. My investigative journalist instincts kicked in, connecting dots I hadn't even known existed. "The Thorn Group. Thorn wasn't your father's last name." It was your mother's. Exactly, Elias replied. My father was Arthur Miller. The head accountant your father threw under the bus 20 years ago. When he died in prison, I swore I'd take back every brick, every cent, and every ounce of dignity Alistair Vance stole. The janitor job? It wasn't just a cover, Talia. It was access. I've spent the last 3 years in the bowels of that building, installing more than just light bulbs. I know every secret hidden in those walls. I know about the offshore accounts. I know about the fracking deals. And tomorrow, I'm going to use them. He let go of me and walked to his briefcase, pulling out a folder. You're an investigative journalist, Talia. You've been looking for the story of the decade. Here it is. I opened the folder. My breath hitched. It was a paper trail leading directly from my father's private accounts to a series of illegal land acquisitions. He hadn't just been losing money, he had been stealing it from the company's pension funds to cover his gambling debts and failed tech investments. Sterling, my brother, was the one signing the checks. They aren't just broke, Elias, I said, flipping through the pages. They're criminals. And tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., they're going to beg the Thorn Group to save them from prison, Elias said. I want you there. Not as my wife, but as the journalist who's going to break the story of the Vance family's collapse. It's time you choose, Talia. Are you a Vance, or are you with me? I didn't sleep that night. I sat in our small living room, the flickering light of my laptop screen illuminating the room. I spent hours cross-referencing Elias's documents with my own files. It was all there. My father had built a house of cards, and he had used me as a sacrificial lamb to keep up appearances, trying to marry me off to a business rival's son before I chose Elias. The next morning, the atmosphere in our home was electric. Elias wasn't wearing his blue coveralls. He was wearing a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than our car. He looked like the man he was, the shadow king of the city. I put on my sharpest blazer, my press badge tucked into my pocket. We didn't speak much over breakfast. The time for words was over. We arrived at the Vance Global headquarters in a blacked-out SUV. As we pulled up to the curb, I saw my father's Mercedes and Sterling's flashy sports car already parked out front. They were early. They were desperate. Ready? Elias asked, looking at me. Give them hell, I said. We entered the lobby. The receptionist, a woman who had seen me grow up, didn't even recognize me at first. I walked with a purpose I hadn't felt in months. We bypassed the security desk. Elias had a keycard that gave him access to every floor, a gift from his janitorial duties that the security team hadn't yet revoked. We reached the top floor. The boardroom doors were double-thick oak, etched with the Vance family crest, a symbol of a legacy built on lies. Inside, I could hear voices. Hi, panicked voices. Where are they? That was Sterling. He sounded like he was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. The Thorn representative was supposed to be here 10 minutes ago. If we don't get the signature on the debt transfer by noon, the feds will be at the door by 2. Shut up, Sterling, my father barked. Beatrice, fix your face. You look like you're going to a funeral. Maybe I am, Alistair, my mother's voice was cold, sharp. I told you that fracking deal was a mistake. I told you not to touch my family's land. If we lose the estate, I'm leaving you. You'll do no such thing, Alistair hissed. We just need to sign the papers. The Thorn Group wants the Zenith Tower. We give it to them, they absorb the debt, and we live to fight another day. It's just business. Elias looked at me and winked. Then, he pushed the doors open. The room went silent. Alistair was standing at the head of the table, his face a mask of exhausted arrogance. Sterling was clutching a pen as if it were a weapon. My mother, Beatrice, was sitting in the corner, her pearls tied around her throat. Their eyes moved from the doors to Elias, then to me. Talia, my mother gasped, standing up. What are you doing here? And why is your husband with you? Alistair's face turned a deep, angry shade of purple. Get out. Both of you. This is a private board meeting. Security. Security isn't coming, Alistair, Elias said, his voice echoing in the vast room. He walked to the empty chair at the opposite end of the table and sat down, crossing his legs comfortably. In fact, I believe I'm the one you've been waiting for. Sterling laughed, a shrill, hysterical sound. You? The janitor? Alistair, tell the help to leave before I have him arrested for trespassing. I wouldn't do that if I were you, Sterling, I said, stepping forward and placing my recorder on the table. I'm here on the record. And my husband is here to discuss the Thorn Group's acquisition of your remaining assets. Alistair froze. He looked at Elias, really looked at him, and I watched the realization dawn on his face. He saw the suit, the watch, the absolute lack of fear in the eyes of the man he had ridiculed. He looked at the folder Elias placed on the table, the Thorn Group logo embossed in gold on the front. You. Alistair whispered. You're Thorn? I'm the man who owns your debt, Alistair, Elias said, leaning forward. I own the mortgage on this building. I own the liens on your mother's ancestral lands. And as of 20 minutes ago, I own the majority share of Vance Global's outstanding bonds. You don't work for yourself anymore. You work for me. Beatrice let out a small, strangled cry. Sterling dropped his pen, it rolled across the mahogany table and fell to the floor with a quiet thud. This is a joke, Sterling stammered. A prank. Talia, tell us this is some sick joke you're playing because we didn't like your marriage. It's no joke, Sterling, I said, opening my own notebook. I've spent the last 12 hours verifying the fraud you and father committed with the pension funds. I have the wire transfer records. I have the emails. The Thorn Group isn't here to save you. They're here to liquidate you. Alistair sank into his chair, looking every bit his 58 years. The fire in his eyes had been extinguished, replaced by a hollow, haunting fear. Why? He asked, looking at Elias. Why all the theater? The cleaning, the marriage to my daughter. The cleaning was for me, Elias said. I wanted to see the look on your face when you realized the man who emptied your trash was the same man who was emptying your bank account. And as for Talia. He looked at me, and his expression softened for a fraction of a second. That was the one thing I didn't plan. I didn't expect to fall in love with the only Vance who actually had a soul. But it worked out perfectly. Because now, she gets to tell the world exactly who you are. You can't do this, Beatrice pleaded, stepping toward me. Talia, we're your family. Think of the scandal. Your own father in prison? Your brother's career ruined? You'd be an outcast. I was already an outcast, Mother, I said firmly. You disowned me for marrying a man based on his paycheck. You didn't care about my happiness, you cared about the Vance brand. Well, the brand is dead. Elias slid a single sheet of paper across the table toward Alistair. Sign this. It's a full confession of the pension fund embezzlement. In exchange, I won't call the authorities until tomorrow morning. It gives you 24 hours to get your affairs in order and move out of the Vance estate. I'm turning it into a public park and a community center. Our home? Beatrice shrieked. You're taking our home? It was never yours, Elias countered. It was built on the backs of people like my father. People you stepped on to get to the top. Now, the view from the top is getting a little crowded, isn't it? Alistair looked at the paper, then at me, searching for some spark of loyalty. He found none. I stood there, pen in hand, ready to document the fall of a dynasty. He reached for the pen Sterling had dropped, his hand shaking so violently he could barely grip it. If I sign this, Alistair said, his voice cracking, what happens to Talia? Talia is staying with me, Elias said, standing up. And she's going to be the most famous journalist in the country by this time tomorrow. Now, sign the paper, Alistair. Or we can just call the FBI right now. I have them on speed dial. As my father's pen touched the paper, I felt a strange mix of relief and terror. The war was won, but the aftermath was just beginning. Just as the signature was finished, the boardroom phone rang. Sterling, trembling, answered it on speaker. "Mr. Vance," a voice came through, frantic. "It's security from the lobby. There's a group of men here. They say they're from the Internal Revenue Service. They have a warrant for Alistair and Sterling Vance." Elias frowned, looking at his watch. "They're early," he muttered. But I looked at the door and saw something else. A man I didn't recognize was standing in the hallway, watching us through the glass. He wasn't wearing a suit, he was wearing a tactical vest. He gave a sharp nod to Elias, but Elias didn't nod back. He looked confused. "Elias?" I whispered. "Who is that?" Elias stepped toward the glass, his eyes narrowing. "That's not my security team." Suddenly, the lights in the entire building flickered and died. The hum of the air conditioning cut out, leaving us in a stifling, heavy silence. In the dim light of the emergency LEDs, I saw Elias reach into his jacket, not for a phone, but for something heavy and metallic. "Get under the table, Talia," he commanded, his voice dropping an octave. "What's going on?" Alistair screamed, fumbling in the dark. "Someone else wanted your debt, Alistair," Elias hissed, his eyes fixed on the door. "And they aren't as patient as I am." The sound of shattering glass erupted from the hallway, followed by the heavy boots of men who weren't coming for a business meeting. I realized then that the Thorn Group wasn't the only player on the board, and Elias's secret life was far deeper, and more dangerous, than he had led me to believe. As the door kicked open, I realized that the man I married wasn't just a billionaire. He was a target. The tactical vest wasn't a police uniform, IT didn't have a badge, and the man wearing it didn't look like he had any interest in reading anyone their rights. As the glass of the boardroom doors shattered inward, the sound was deafening, a sharp, crystalline explosion that seemed to punctuate the end of the Vance dynasty. I felt Elias's hand on my shoulder, firm and steady, guiding me down behind the heavy mahogany table. My heart was a drum in my chest, a frantic rhythm that clashed with the sudden, cold precision of my husband's movements. "Elias, who are these people?" I whispered, my voice caught in the back of my throat. He didn't answer right away. He was checking the magazine of the handgun he'd pulled from a concealed holster I never even knew existed. This was the man who, for 3 years, had come home smelling of industrial floor wax and cheap detergent. This was the man who had patiently listened to me vent about my investigative pieces for the Gazette while he nursed a beer on our sagging porch. Now, his eyes were like flint, scanning the room with a tactical awareness that chilled me to the bone. "Stay down, Talia," he said, his voice a low, vibrating growl. "Alistair, if you want to live to see the sunrise, you'll shut up and crawl into that corner. Now." My father, the great Alistair Vance, didn't argue. He collapsed to the floor, his expensive suit gathering dust as he huddled near the credenza. Beatrice was already there, her muffled sobs the only sound in the room besides the heavy, rhythmic thud of combat boots on the plush carpet. Sterling was frozen in his chair, his face the color of spoiled milk, staring at the door as the men in black filtered in. The leader stepped into the dim glow of the emergency lights. He was tall, scarred, and looked like he had been forged in a war zone. He ignored my family entirely, his gaze fixing solely on Elias. He didn't raise his weapon, but the tension in the room was so thick it felt like it might spontaneously combust. "Thorn," the man said, his voice like gravel. "It's been a long time. I heard you were playing house in the suburbs. Scrubbing toilets for a living." I didn't believe it until I saw the photos. Elias stood up slowly, his weapon held at his side but ready. "Cleaning floors is honest work, Victor. More than I can say for what you're doing here. This is a private boardroom. You're trespassing on Thorn Group property." Victor laughed, a dry, hollow sound. "The Thorn Group? Is that what we're calling it now? Alistair Vance owes my clients $50 million in high-interest bridge loans he thought he could hide. He's been using Vance Global assets as collateral for 3 different lenders at once. We're here to collect the physical assets before the banks realize there's nothing left to seize." I looked at my father. He looked away, his shame finally overriding his arrogance. My brother, Sterling, let out a choked gasp. 50 million, Dad, what did you do? He tried to play with the big boys, Victor sneered, stepping closer. But Alistair isn't a big boy. He's a middle manager with a fancy name. Now, Thorne, step aside. We take the old man, we take the girl, and we negotiate the transfer of the estate. The room went deathly silent. I felt a cold shiver race down my spine. They wanted me as leverage. I looked up at Elias, expecting to see fear, or perhaps the calculated hesitation of a businessman weighing his options. Instead, I saw a predator. You're not taking anyone, Victor, Elias said. And you're certainly not touching my wife. You're outnumbered, Elias, Victor countered, his men raising their submachine guns. And outgunned. Am I? Elias asked. He reached into his pocket and pressed a button on a small, black remote. Suddenly, the boardroom walls, the ones we thought were solid oak, began to hiss. Hidden panels slid back, and before Victor could blink, a dozen men in gray tactical gear, far more professional and better equipped than Victor's mercenaries, emerged from the shadows of the executive suite. They didn't say a word. They simply leveled their sights on Victor's team. The Thorne Group doesn't just own real estate, Victor, Elias said, his voice echoing in the stifling room. We own the security firms that protect the real estate. We own the technology that monitors every square inch of this district. And right now, I own your life. Drop the weapons, or the cleaning crew is going to have a very difficult time getting the blood out of this carpet tomorrow morning. The clatter of weapons hitting the floor was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. Victor's men, realizing they were caught in a kill zone, raised their hands. Elias's team moved in with the speed of shadows, disarming them and zip-tying their wrists in a matter of seconds. Elias didn't look relieved. He looked bored. He tucked his weapon back into its holster and turned to one of his men. Take them to the sub-basement. Call the police in an hour. Tell them we caught a group of armed kidnappers. Don't mention me. Yes, sir, the man replied, bowing slightly before leading the mercenaries away. The lights flickered and surged back to life. The hum of the air conditioning returned, but the atmosphere in the room had changed forever. My family crawled out from their hiding spots, staring at Elias as if he were a ghost. Or a god. Beatrice was the first to find her voice. She smoothed her skirt, her hands trembling as she looked at Elias, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and newfound greed. Elias, honey, we had no idea. We were just worried about Talia, you see? The world is so dangerous, and we thought you were just a janitor. Elias turned to her, his expression unreadable. I am a janitor, Beatrice. I spent the last 3 years cleaning up the messes people like you leave behind. But I also own the company that owns the company that owns your mortgage. Which brings us back to Alistair's signature. He picked up the paper from the table. It was signed. Alistair's frantic, shaky scrawls were a death warrant for his career. You're taking everything, Alistair whispered, leaning against the wall for support. The house, the cars, the company, everything? Not everything, Elias said, looking at me. I'm leaving you your lives. Something Victor wasn't going to give you. But as of this moment, the Vance name is officially retired. Talia and I are leaving. You have 24 hours to vacate the estate. I suggest you pack light. Talia, tell him. Sterling pleaded, stepping toward me. We're family. You can't let him do this. I'm your brother. I looked at Sterling. I thought about the way he had laughed when they disowned me. I thought about the way he had called my husband a service entrance peasant just an hour ago. I thought about the investigative journalist in me, the woman who had spent her life looking for the truth beneath the polished surface of the elite. I'm not a Vance anymore, Sterling, I said, my voice steady and cold. I'm a Thorne. And according to my husband, you're trespassing. Elias took my hand. His skin was warm, a sharp contrast to the icy tension of the room. He led me toward the door, walking right through the shattered glass as if it weren't even there. We left them there, my father, my mother, and my brother, standing in the ruins of their own vanity. As we stepped into the hallway, a private elevator was waiting. It didn't go to the lobby. It went to the roof. "Elias," I said as the doors closed. "Where are we going?" "Home," he said. "Our apartment? The one with the leaky sink?" He looked at me, and for the first time that night, a small, genuine smile touched his lips. "No, Talia. I think it's time you saw where I actually live. And I think it's time you realized that when I told you I owned half the city, I was being modest." The elevator opened onto a helipad. A sleek, black helicopter was idling, its rotors spinning with a low, rhythmic throb. A pilot in a crisp uniform stepped out and held the door open. I climbed in, my mind spinning faster than the blades. As we lifted off, the city began to shrink below us. The skyscrapers, the glowing arteries of the highways, the sprawling estates of the wealthy, it all looked like a toy set from this height. Elias pointed out the window toward the north side of the city. "That district? The new tech hub?" "Thorn Group," he said. "The shipping yards to the west?" "Thorn Logistics." "The bank that handles 90% of the city's commercial loans?" "Thorn Finance." "And that tower in the center, the one that's still under construction?" I looked at the massive, glass and steel monolith rising above the skyline, higher than any other building in the state. "What about it?" "It's going to be the new headquarters for the Thorn Media Group," he said, turning to me. "And if you're still interested in being an investigative journalist, I think the editor-in-chief position is currently vacant. You'd have total editorial independence. No one to answer to but the truth." I stared at him, breathless. "You did all of this, while you were pretending to mop floors?" "I didn't do it while I was mopping floors, Talia. I did it because I was mopping floors. I wanted to see who people really were when they thought no one important was watching. I wanted to see if I could find a woman who would love a man for his soul, not his portfolio. And I found you." He leaned in, his forehead resting against mine. "The janitor was a test, Talia. For the world, and for myself. But the man you married? He's real. And he's never letting you go." As the helicopter banked toward a massive estate nestled in the hills, a place that made my father's mansion look like a guest house, I realized the story was far from over. My family was gone, but a new empire was rising. And this time I wasn't just writing the story. I was the one holding the pen. But as we landed, I noticed something. A line of black SUVs was parked in the driveway of the Thorn estate. And standing in front of them wasn't security. They were men in suits, carrying briefcases. They looked like lawyers, but their expressions were grim. "Elias?" I asked as the rotors slowed. "Who are they?" His face hardened again. The warmth disappeared, replaced by that flinty, tactical gaze. "It seems my father's old partners heard about the janitor coming out of retirement. They've been waiting for me to show my face so they could serve me with something I've been running from for 10 years. "What is it?" Elias stepped out of the helicopter and reached back to help me down. "A subpoena, Talia. It seems the Thorn Group wasn't built on just hard work and real estate. It was built on a secret that Alistair Vance wasn't the only one trying to hide. And now that I've exposed myself to save you, the wolves are coming for the whole pack." I looked at the men in suits, then back at the city lights. I was a journalist. I knew a lead when I saw one. And this lead was about to take us into a darkness deeper than any boardroom power play. My family had disowned me for marrying a janitor, but they had no idea that the man I chose was the only one who could survive the storm that was about to break. "Well," I said, clutching my notebook to my chest. "I guess I better start writing." Elias gripped my hand, his eyes locking onto mine. "Write fast, Talia. Because by tomorrow morning, we might be the ones looking for a place to hide." We walked toward the house, two people against the world, as the first drops of rain began to fall over the city Elias Thorn owned, and the secrets that threatened to burn it all down. The Vance family was a memory, but the war for the Thorne legacy had only just begun. And as an investigative journalist, I knew the most dangerous part of any story isn't the lie you tell the world, it's the truth you tell yourself. Elias stopped at the front door, turning to face the lead man in the suit. "Mr. Thorne," the man said, stepping forward. "You've been a very difficult man to find. But your father's estate is finally being unsealed, and the inheritance comes with conditions you can no longer ignore." Elias didn't flinch. "I'm not interested in his conditions." "You don't understand, sir," the man replied, handing over a thick, wax-sealed envelope. "If you don't accept the terms, the Thorne Group dissolves at midnight. And half the city goes down with it." I looked at the envelope, then at Elias. The janitor was gone. The billionaire was under siege. And I was exactly where I needed to be, at the center of the explosion. The envelope in Elias's hand wasn't just a legal document, it was the deed to my father's downfall. As an investigative journalist, I spent my career digging for the truth, but I never expected the biggest story of my life to be sitting on my own husband's desk. Elias Thorne hadn't just been a janitor, he had been a silent guardian, waiting for the clock to run out on a decades-old blood feud. The next morning, the grand boardroom of Vance Global was silent. My father, Alistair Vance, sat at the head of the table, flanked by my brother Sterling and my mother Beatrice, who was still adjusting her pearls as if her social status could protect her from the coming storm. They were there to sign over the final shares of the company to a mystery conglomerate to save themselves from bankruptcy. "Where's the representative from the Thorne Group?" Alistair barked, checking his gold watch. "We don't have all day." The double door swung open. I walked in first, my press badge clipped to my blazer, my notebook open. Behind me walked Elias. He wasn't wearing his grease-stained jumpsuit. He was in a charcoal gray suit that cost more than my father's car, his posture commanding and his gaze cold. "You?" Sterling gasped, half rising from his chair. "What is this janitor doing here?" "Talia, get your husband out of here before I have security throw you both out." Elias didn't blink. He sat down at the opposite end of the table and slid a single document across the polished mahogany. "I wouldn't call security, Sterling. They work for me now. In fact, everyone in this building does." Alistair's face went pale as he read the document. This is impossible." "The Thorne Group? You're the heir to Arthur Thorne? The man you betrayed 30 years ago," Elias said, his voice like iron. "You thought you buried his legacy when you stole his patents and left his family with nothing. But you forgot one thing, Alistair. Real power isn't about the name on the building. It's about who owns the land beneath it." For the next hour, I watched as my family's world crumbled. Elias didn't just own half the city, he owned the debt, the land, and the very air Vance Global breathed. He had spent years working as a janitor in their secondary buildings, not out of necessity, but to observe the rot from the inside, waiting until he turned 30 to legally reclaim the Thorne empire. My mother, Beatrice, looked at me with wide, panicked eyes. "Talia, darling, tell him we're family. We can work this out." I looked at her, then at my father and brother. "You disowned me for marrying a man you thought was beneath you. You valued a title over a human being. Well, now you have neither." Elias stood up, adjusting his cuffs. "The Vance family has 24 hours to vacate the estate. I'm liquidating the company and turning the headquarters into a low-income housing foundation. Talia will be writing the exclusive on the Vance family's decades of corporate fraud." As we walked out of that boardroom, leaving my family in the ruins of their own greed, I realized that I hadn't just married a man, I had married a partner who understood the weight of the truth. My father had spent his life trying to write my story for me, but as Elias gripped my hand in the elevator, I knew the pen was finally in my hand. Today, Elias and I live in a city that looks very different. The Vance name is a cautionary tale, but the Thorne legacy is one of restoration. I'm still a journalist, but I don't chase headlines anymore, I chase justice. My family disowned me for marrying a janitor, but in the end, that janitor taught me that the only thing more powerful than a secret is the courage to stand by the person you love when the world is watching. The truth didn't just set me free, it gave me a future they could never buy. And if my story teaches you anything, let it be this: never judge a person by the clothes they wear or the job they do. Because the person cleaning the floors today might just be the one who owns the building tomorrow. If this story resonated with you, or if you believe in the power of truth over status, please leave a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on justice and second chances. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories of courage and unexpected turns. Thank you for being a part of this journey with me. Take care of yourselves, and remember, your worth is never defined by someone else's narrow vision. The end.